Was the summer of 2021. At the time, my youngest daughter still slept in the bed with my then spouse and I. I was getting ready to wake up for a prayer call that morning. And so I was just kind of stirring awake when I started to hear a sound on our bed. And it was the sound of like when you're rubbing your, like a body part against like your bed sheet. I woke up thinking it was my then spouse passing my youngest daughter over to me in the bed. So I immediately sat up, then saw that they were both laying down. He was laying down and I started to tap where my youngest daughter would be sleeping. So now I'm fully awake. I get up and I'm like, where's my child? She was further down the bed, lying horizontally above her father's lap area. To see her positioned in that manner, I was like, she doesn't sleep like this. I immediately pulled her towards me. And now I'm like, okay, what was that sound? If he's laying down, what was that sound? Is he really asleep? And so I started to kind of reach towards him to see if my ex was awake or not. And that was when his alarm clock went off. Not less than a minute or so, he grabs his phone and he heads out of the bedroom. I immediately get up and I also go out to see, like, what is he doing? When he turns around to come back out of the bathroom, he immediately covers himself. I knew that if I could see his body, I would have an understanding of what was he doing with my child that morning. About an hour or so later, my older two kids were up and they were getting ready to head out to school, and he was going to take them to school that morning. When the kids came out, my then spouse came out as well. My older two kids greeted him and he says good morning to them. And my youngest said good morning as well. And he did not respond. I said, you didn't hear her? It's clear something is happening, and it's clear that he's trying to find a way to kind of walk past it or circumvent it. By the end of the day, when he came back from work, he walked right into the front door. He walked past my older two and went straight for my youngest, picks her up and plants this big kiss on her mouth. And he's not looking at her. He's looking directly at me. And I remember I wanted to vomit in my mouth. My main focus at that point was, what do I need to do to protect my children? I slept with my youngest daughter in the living room. I would sleep with her in my older two kids' bedroom. At this point as well, the tension in the house just became astronomical. We're almost now to the end of the divorce proceedings, and my youngest daughter was sitting on the bed behind me drawing. I hear her behind me say, okay, now I'm going to draw a PP. I turn around and say, baby, where did you hear that from? You know, we don't use that language. She got quiet. She looked down and she said, on daddy. I hold my breath. So I say, okay, you saw it in the daytime, right? And she said, no, at nighttime. I said, well, you guys were sitting in the living room watching movies or TV, yeah? And she said, no, it was in the bedroom. Maybe was daddy in the bathroom? And she said, no, it was on the bed. I asked her those questions again in a different order. She says the exact same thing, gives the exact same answers. I gave her the biggest hug and just tried to assure her that you're so brave, because now at the time she's 4. For her to be able to recall, to answer, and to do it so clearly, I said, do you know how smart you are? Do you know how brave you are? Now what do I really do? Visitation is still happening. There's one time when the kids came home, again with my youngest daughter, she came home and her body part in that area was red and swollen. I asked her, I was like, baby, what happened? She does this thing that she lifts up her legs and she holds like her knees with her hands. How would she position herself like that? I said, why are you holding your legs like that? And I remember she just laid down there and just looked me dead in the eye. She took a princess wand and she said, Mommy, this is how you play with a princess wand. She took the wand and she rolled it between her feet with her hands. And I looked at her and said, no, baby, that's not how you play with the princess wand. This is real. I called CPS. I got a call back like the next hour, and it was a social worker saying, we received your message. We definitely want to come out and do a home visit. We want to speak with your child. We'll be there. And I said, okay, we are here. They spent time with me. They spent time with my children and some other family members that were here in the home. One of the social workers came to me. She said, was there a particular symptom that was common with your then spouse and you, like when you guys were intimate? Every time we were intimate, it always left me feeling like itchy. She said, Mom, that's the same symptom that your baby is also saying that she experienced. The social worker grabbed my hand. She just held my hand, and we just stood in the living room crying. A few more weeks, I get a missed call from Child Protective Services, and they're saying that they were suddenly told by law enforcement that they should shut the entire case down. And I remember thinking, what the hell just happened here? So I ended up going to a prophetic conference at that same time. I remember standing in the back of the room next to this petite, elderly woman. She whispered something to me. She said, you have been through a time of great trial, but the Lord is going to show you and your children that He is a God of justice. I have just entered this room. She does not know me. I do not know her. There's one woman in particular who was like, I'm seeing that you were previously married to a man who has turned towards darkness. She doesn't know my husband. They will come to me, hold my hand, and just start crying. I asked that messy question. What do you call it when your spouse suddenly changes? There's no legal accountability. There's potential abuse, and there's smearing. Like, what do you call all of that? And she looked at me and she said, yeah, that sounds like Freemasonry. And I remember just the certainty in her eyes and the certainty in her voice. I get home from the conference and I'm having all of these dreams. In one of the dreams, I woke up into the dream. I looked towards the foot of the bed and my ex was there. As he's attempting to reach towards me, I can see that his dress shirt is torn at the neck and is torn in between the buttons and knotted as if someone was trying to cover up the fact that it had been ripped apart. He automatically breaks out in a sob and he says, look at what they made me do. In the dream, I can see through his dress shirt on the left side of his chest. There's like a sharp object that is piercing his left. And I started reading. The book starts to break down what the levels of Freemasonry were. In the first layer, it talks about how men who are being initiated in, one of the things that happens to them is that ritual dagger or like a poignard is pierced through their left. I dropped the book. They have a lock when it comes to like in court systems and law enforcement. It talks about how often men who are brought into groups like this, one of the ways that they ascend in rank or power is by doing certain crimes or certain types of, particularly of children. And I'm just sitting down there like, God, what in the world? They sodomize their wives. They sodomize their children. There's this legal impasse. It was all making sense. All of these kind of random pieces of the puzzle were now coming together. Shortly after, my lawyer withdraws from the case. All of the evidence that I had submitted to the lawyer was suddenly gone. My kids were starting to have dreams. My youngest daughter would have this dream of frogs being on her head. And she would try to get it out of her hair, but it would just kind of cling on. And she said the frog didn't ribbit like a frog. It would bark like a dog. In scripture, when you look at the meaning of frogs, it's a symbol of like unclean spirits. You can see it in Revelations. It's saying that there was like an attack of an unclean spirit. My older two children were also having dreams. In particular, they would be, her and her siblings were playing in the living room. And she said she remembers that in this dream, there was a knock at the door. And it was family members of her father calling her to come out and come into this black car. And she was saying no. She looks beyond the house and she saw me holding my youngest daughter saying, you don't have to go if you don't want to. And that's when she said, I don't want to go. And then she woke up from the dream. His father started to make it difficult for the kids to call me while there. This became completely like no contact at all while they were there. I was raging inside, and nothing was said or done or addressed about what my children were telling me about. Fast forward, I was told that we're in the final stages of this process. Nothing was done about not paying child support. Nothing was done about the being locked out from the home. And he said that he was taking the kids, telling the kids to go live with their father, maintain the joint legal, but then switch the tie breaking to him. Within 30 minutes, my kids called me with their teacher's cell phones saying that their father was there in the front office. They were crying. They didn't know if they were supposed to go. They didn't know was this a trick. The feeling I feel is one of is rage. It is unjust. The minute he took my kids, I couldn't just call my kids freely. Times where when I would call, the kids would indicate that he's sitting right there in front of them. In the days and weeks that my kids have been gone, the only thing I could do was work on this story. I also believe that I'm not the only person who's walked through something like this. I made a vow to God that in this whole thing, that I would firmly stand on the truth. You can find more of my story online on Spotify. It's a podcast. It's called If I Told You, Would You Believe Me? Thank you for listening, and hopefully you get some understanding from my story, and hopefully you can be someone that can help to save my kids as well as the other children that have been unjustly detained from the protective parent.